We're recording today from Gadigal Land in Sydney. My name's Danny. I am 19 and I'm on my phone like 7 hours a day.
And I'm Jessy and I'm 30 and I use the laughing with tears emoji unironically.
She literally does. It's fucking terrifying. This is Gen Z Explained.
Where I'm allowed to ask, why are you guys like that?
And I have to answer.
Because I'm your boss.
She's my boss.
This is Gen Z Explained, not Gen Z, do you know what I mean?
All right, Danny. So one of the first questions that people ask when Gen Z comes up is, what is the cutoff? What defines Gen Z? And it's actually something they've moved. So initially, the cutoff was 1995, which is where I'm born,
Yep.
but they moved it back a few years to 1997. But yet still, there are people who are born in 1998 who say, I feel way more millennial than I feel Gen Z. I don't understand people who are 20. They feel like they are a different species to me.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that defines how a generation feels is the formative events that shaped their childhoods and that shaped their view of the world.
Yeah.
So in this episode, we're going to dive into some of our respective formative memories and discuss how they differ. And we'll assign points for millennial memories and Gen Z memories so our audience can figure out whether they're a millennial or a Gen Z.
Okay. Awesome. Can't wait.
Okay, awesome. Let's dive in. Danny, what was your first memory of a big global event? Tell us how old you were, where you were, and how you reacted to it.
So I'm thinking probably 2016.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 11 at that stage.
Mm-hmm.
Trump is elected for the first time.
Right.
So I sort of vaguely remember, because I think like the results come out through the day in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being at the tram stop at the end of the day and these boys in the year above being really hyped.
Interesting.
And being like the underdog, he's like so alpha, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably an interesting precursor to the whole young men being disenfranchised, stuff that we hear so much about today that Trump tapped into. But at the time, that might have just been a bit earlier.
Yeah, okay. So you were 11 when the election was playing out, Trump versus Hillary, historic election.
Yeah.
You know, many people thought that Hillary would win and become the first female president. Do you remember what you were thinking as you were engaging with that campaign?
So that's the thing. I think it's at that time in my life where I only vaguely remember it.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember shock
Interesting.
from everyone in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at school, we kind of loved it because we didn't have to do much work. Because the teachers were like crying.
Oh, that's so funny. Your teachers were probably millennials.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
and you should go meet up with them. Sorry.
Nice. That's really interesting because I was at university when
So how old were you?
I would have been 21.
Yeah,
because I'm 10 years older than you. So I would have been 21. I was in my third year at university and probably my peer group was more like your teachers. I had a lot of friends who were really excited for Hillary to become the first female president. It felt like she was this example of someone who had worked really hard her whole life, was eminently qualified for the job. Sure, like not everyone agreed with her stances on foreign policy or liked her necessarily, but it was meant to be this really big moment to show everyone that the glass ceiling could be shattered in that highest office of the land. And as you said, the results came in slowly over the course of the day, and even the betting markets had like the odds for Trump, massively off. He was like 1 in 10 or something like that. And then we saw those odds change over the course of the day. We saw more seats get called for Trump that were upsets to what the pundits had predicted. That was an election where the polls were really off.
Yeah.
And I think in my circles at the time, which was, at ANU, a very left-leaning, politically engaged campus, I don't think the word work was salient then, actually, in 2016. I think that's a later thing. It's like my friendship group went into mourning. We couldn't believe it.
That's kind of interesting as a seminal moment for Gen Z, for younger people. Trump was something most of us, he came into our lives quite early. And I wonder if you're 12 years old and you're saying things you shouldn't in the back of the classroom, the teacher has less authority to be like, that's not okay. You can't say that. Because we could literally be like, the president of the United States was deemed worthy by 70 million people. And he said this in a recording like the TMZ caught or so the moral authority, I think.
I wonder if that is part of why Gen Z seems more cynical about politics and distrusting of institutions, because for me, when I was a teenager, it was Obama. And he was, exactly. Yeah. He came into his first term, so that was 2008. This example of, you know, an incredibly well-spoken, inspirational, you know, Martin Luther King reminiscent character. People filled the inauguration. It was like the largest ever. And there was a sense that politics was actually a really honorable lever for change. And a lot of my friends were, you know, really inspired by Obama and that administration. Was that different for you, your view of politics?
Well, yeah, totally. Not just in the US, but in Australia. Like the political background for my peers' upbringing is the series of backstabbings, Rudd, Gillard, Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison, which I think has probably vested us with like a profound, not only disinterest, but just eye roll for politics.
Oh, yep.
And it's quite sad. That's probably why we're so cynical.
There's been a lack of like aspirational, idealistic people. It doesn't feel like politics is about
like
ideology.
When was the last leader we had that inspired us?
Yeah, such a good point.
What about you? What's your big moment that you first remember?
Oh, my first big like global event. I think for me and for many people of the millennial generation, it's 9/11. So it happened in 2001. I was
-4.
You were -4. I was 6. It happened very shortly after I migrated to New Zealand from China. So for me, those two events collapse into each other a little bit. But I remember my parents coming into the room that me and my grandparents were in and saying, you know, something's happened, like, you know, it's on the TV, something bad. And then I remember over the next week just watching the footage of the planes crashing into the Twin Towers over and over again. It was just on repeat, every station, all hours of the day. And, you know, the investigation into who had done it. And then subsequently the announcement of the war on Afghanistan. And then, you know, a few years after that, the Iraq war. And so my kind of, you know, early childhood was very, the spectre of conflict in the Middle East loomed very large in the Bush administration. And I remember having like a very strong opinion that Bush was a very bad man when I was like 8 years old.
Well, that's interesting that just like with what we spoke about politically, Gen Z has only ever come into a post 9/11 world. Most of us, we miss the age of innocence that was purportedly before that. We come into a world where the US is continually at war on abstract terror in the Middle East.
Yes.
Probably adds to the cynicism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think to bring it together for our listeners, if your first set of memories were around 9/11, Obama, idealism in politics, this notion that the glass ceiling could be shattered,
every like good thing,
a point in the millennial column, and
if it was Trump, that sort of like 2016 time, point in Gen Z.
All right, let's move on to something a little bit more personal. Let's talk about your first formative memories of the internet.
Yeah. Okay, so for me, I think I got my first phone like at 11 or 12 when I started using public transport.
Lucky you.
Yeah, love that. Shout out to my
What
parents.
phone was it?
It was a smart, like an Apple phone, maybe whatever it was then, like an iPhone 5 or 6.
Okay, yeah.
And all my friends had social media. I had like Instagram and maybe Snapchat from 11 or 12.
Really?
Which is sort of crazy.
Did your parents like let you use all of those things? Were parents wise in those days about the dangers of social media?
No. And I think at one point we'll talk about the social media ban and the question of whether it's parents' role to like arbitrate in their family over social media. They shouldn't have to, because who can blame them for not knowing the dangers or what it's like? That was completely foreign to my parents.
I see.
I'm the youngest, so their style of parenting was sort of hands off
Right.
by
Okay.
that stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay, so you were 11, you had a phone, you had a smartphone.
Yes.
You were on all of these social medias. You were
Yeah.
constantly connected to your friends.
always
Okay.
connected. Like these platforms
Right. Yeah.
are
Connected.
advertised
Yeah.
as connecting
Yeah.
us, but Gen Z reports the highest instances of loneliness and isolation. So
Yeah.
go figure.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Because
Yours?
yeah, for me, and once again, speaking a little bit on behalf of my generation, I think seminal memories are around there still being dial-up internet. So your internet and your phone had the same connection, and you couldn't use the phone when somebody was using the internet.
Oh my God.
Imagine.
It's horrible.
And the first so my first phone was like a little dumb phone, like a brick, and you could play a few games on it. You could like play a game
That's
like
kind of trendy
Snake.
now.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah,
cool
yeah.
from you.
I remember as a teenager, I was really jealous of the girls at my school who had Motorola flip
Like the pink
phones. Yeah, the like bright
Yeah, like
metallic
Paris
pink
Hilton.
ones.
Yeah,
Yeah, yes. And people would put like gems on them, like diamantes.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. But first experience of the internet, the thing I loved as a kid was Neopets. So Neopets is this kind of like virtual world. You have a pet. You can have several. You can have up to 4 pets. The pets are based on animals. So I had like a little wolf pet, a lupe.
Yeah. Do you still play this? You sound very passionate about this game.
I'm very nostalgic
Yeah.
for Neopets. Those were halcyon days.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I used to love coming home after school. You know, I'd get like an allocation of 40 minutes that I would like beg to extend. I would like barter like anything for like additional internet time for my parents. I'd come home, I'd play. There were these like mini games that you could play, these like flash games that you could play to earn points. And then Neopia had this whole economy. So you could use your points to like buy accessories for your pets or to level them up so that they could be stronger in the battle dome where you could fight other pets. It was also like a bit of an era of internet Wild West where there were these forums that you could actually just go and like talk to strangers and like nobody had to age verify or put their photo up.
Oh.
Nobody had a profile picture. They just had like pets. So
Was this dangerous?
I mean, like now that I think about it, it would not fly in this day and age because it would be exploited by bad actors using it to like groom children.
Yeah.
But I don't think again like people were that like
It was innocent.
yeah people didn't think about the danger of the internet that much because it was relatively early on and there just hadn't been enough time for people to wise up to how to exploit the system and target vulnerable people.
Were you around the time growing up of like Bebo or MySpace? Because I heard a rumor that you like ranked your friends. What the fuck? Was that drama of the highest order?
Yeah. So, yes, I was on Bebo. I never had MySpace.
Yeah.
I had Bebo in year 8. So delicate age, like
worst age.
just turned 13, I guess. So Bebo had this interface where you had friends and then on your page, like your Facebook page, there would be a section where you'd have your top friends and you could click edit and you had to rank them from 1 to 16. And I was really traumatized.
Go on though.
I was really quite traumatized by it because I didn't have like a reciprocal best friend.
Jessy,
right?
You're my best friend.
And now we
Even though you
each
like
other.
pay me.
Well, actually, later in life, I had a really close friend, Alana, and we said to each other, if social media ever brings back that top friends interface,
You made a pact?
we will make each other our best friends. Like it's settled.
So you're
like we
safe.
wouldn't have to.
Okay.
Yeah. But now she's engaged to someone. So
Damn it, men. Presuming it's a man.
it's actually a woman.
Win for women. Good woke moment from me.
But yeah, back then you had to rank your friends. And it was just there for everyone to see. And I think, I went to an all-girls school, and girls can get a little bit catty. So we do things like if you were in a fight with a friend, they'd done something to slight you, then you would move them to the bottom of your top friends, or you would move them down a few places in your friendship.
That's like psychologically very.
It was psychologically
slowly moving
dangerous.
them down.
It was.
We should bring this to our workplace.
It exists.
Be a good motivator.
Yeah, you're just not in the chat.
Is that true? What the fuck? Cool chat. Let's take a break.
All right, Danny, a big one from the last 5 years that we probably experienced quite differently is COVID.
Yeah.
How old were you when COVID happened?
2020. I was like 15.
Yeah, okay. So you had COVID
14.
school.
Yeah.
And you're in Victoria, so you had a pretty long lockdown.
Longest lockdown in the world.
Yeah.
So COVID school for like 2 years, in and out. It was kind of gorgeous for me.
Yeah.
I'm very lucky in that I was in like year 8 and 9, so it wasn't the most important schooling.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I could just close the computer.
So because I think our listeners who didn't go through this would be really interested. What happened day to day? Like, did you get up at 9 a.m. and log in and be on a Zoom call with your class?
Yeah, so same school hours.
Right.
Same timetable.
Yeah.
It's just Zoom for them all.
Yeah.
Lunch was, I went and made lunch in the kitchen.
Yeah, okay.
So it was pretty, now that I look back on it, insane.
Yeah.
And I remember maybe I was a bit too young to be taking things seriously, because I remember texting my friends. We were waiting for that day's announcement of how many COVID cases there were. Oh,
yes, of course. That would happen like during first period or something, right?
Yeah. And it was like the tea of the day.
Right. Okay.
Tea means drama, by the way, to our boomer listeners.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to ask you a whole bunch of questions about this. Like, Zoom class, did people have their cameras on?
That was like the battle for the teachers, getting kids to have their cameras on.
Okay.
Because most people were in their beds. I was, and I would usually make it look like I was at my desk.
Okay. And did people engage?
Some did. I think the usual gap that you have in a classroom between engaged kids and non-engaged kids was widened by COVID.
Yeah.
And I think that made it quite hard for teachers.
Did you feel like your learning fell behind during COVID?
Not for me, because we still got through the content, but it was just, I don't know, looking back, how it got pretty boring pretty quickly.
Okay.
And like your eyes hurt looking at a computer.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And this is what every school kid in the state was going through.
Yeah.
There
was a lot of social commentary about how kids who went through that during their formative years like are stunted in their development because, socializing with other kids is so important to developing social skills and not being like awkward to like go up to strangers and that kind of thing. And people say that's one explanation for why Gen Z are a little bit more, they hate picking up the phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any truth in that from your experience?
Definitely. So Neil Postman, who's a media theorist, says that technology gives and takes away. So when the clock was introduced in the 12th century, it gave humankind the ability to tell time precisely, but it took away our observant streak in nature, in that we're no longer looking at the stars in the sky,
right,
or the length of shadows in the day, or the color of leaves in the seasons to tell time.
Yeah.
So times 1,000 the impact of social media for my young generation, we have the ability to be connecting with one another from our beds, from different countries, like wherever. But in giving us that ability, it's taken away actual real life socialization, because it substituted so much of that.
Yeah,
and compounded by COVID, when that forced us to be alone, it meant we're sort of maybe stunted's an extreme word, but in this time in our lives when we're meant to be playing outside and interacting and scraping our knees and learning social cues, now we don't have that, and social media companies advertise themselves as a perfect substitution for that, as a way to stay connected. True. I think the whole online school thing put to rest once and for all the idea that in this digital world we can do so much more remotely, maybe even remote school, because it showed that so much of education is face to
That's
face,
so true, right?
especially for kids. So what about you? What was your COVID experience?
Yeah, my COVID. So I was working.
Yeah.
I was working at NAB Ventures, which is the venture capital arm of the National Australia Bank. I had only been in that job for about 4 months before COVID happened, and then we were work from home remotely, and that was a really interesting adjustment. I remember the first few weeks felt kind of like interesting and fun,
Novel, yeah.
right? And it's kind of nice to like
Yeah.
not have to commute in the morning,
Yeah.
and just be at home and be able to make
Yeah.
yourself food and whatever. And people were quite like, people would have their dogs come up onto the
screen.
Zoom,
Yeah.
and we would be like, oh, it's such a cute dog. And
Yeah.
I feel like you got to know your coworkers a little bit better
Yeah.
because you would see like their partners walking around in the
Yeah.
background. I had housemates, and one housemate was a hairdresser, so she couldn't work.
Yeah.
So she was just like walking around in the background with a robe.
Yeah.
So my coworkers gave like names to the various characters
Oh,
that we
cute.
would
Okay.
see moving in each other's Zooms.
And then fast forward 6 months and
Yeah, no, work
everyone's,
from
like,
home.
depressed and haggard.
I do think that some of that in the office collaboration that you get, because we work from the office now and we're always
Yeah.
like riffing on each other, and
Yeah.
people are chiming in on projects that they're not
Yeah.
working on but might have an idea of. So I think you lost that.
Yeah.
So it was less collaborative. And I think for me, because I was like a junior, I definitely lost the learning by osmosis that you get, this notion that, your manager might just pull you into a meeting because, you're just around and
Yeah.
they know you're not got something on.
Yeah.
It has to be more intentional to add you to a Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
So I do think for people who were early in their careers when that happened and trying to apprentice, it was maybe damaging to their ability to like learn and spot opportunities to step up and things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay, Danny, so it's time for our listener question of the day. And our first question asker is actually your granddad.
Yes, he has recently learned how to do voice memos on WhatsApp.
Oh, goody.
So get ready, everyone. I actually haven't heard
Yeah, go
this.
for it. Yeah.
So if there's like swear words, we'll beep them out.
Okay.
Hi, Danny. Do you think my age group has had it harder than Gen Z has growing up?
Big question.
Interesting.
So how old is your grandpa, if you don't mind me asking?
Potentially 83.
Wow.
I'm not actually drilled on the specifics.
Okay.
But
So he would be a boomer, wouldn't he?
older. What's that? The greatest generation? The silent generation? Like he
Producer?
would have grown up in I think he was born in 1939. So like his parents well versed in the Depression. He was young during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
50s, 60s were his sort of youth.
Okay.
Cold War
Yeah.
was a bit like Vietnam. He probably, like the draft was going on.
Right. Okay.
That's interesting. Have my generation had it harder than his? What do you think?
Yep. Well, what do you think? I mean, like, obviously the world was a harsher place and there was a lot of fear from these global conflicts and from the Cold War era. I don't know, in Australia, do you think that existed to a great extent?
I think that was probably playing on I remember speaking to him about like the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he said that was a thing that they all went through.
Yeah. I think, in America they would have had the drills about, the procedure to get under the desks and those kinds of things and been in constant fear of that. I guess, maybe where we're qualified to answer the question is, what do you think is hard for Gen Zs in this time where we arguably have a lot of material comforts?
Like Uber Eats. Yeah.
Sure, exactly.
And social progress.
Yeah.
As in things aren't perfect now. Far
Yeah,
from
for
it.
sure. It's a more equal society.
Yeah, totally.
Women have more rights, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting thing to weigh up because, okay, he had these hardships, his generation had those hardships, but also most people could afford a freestanding house by the time
That's
they
a
were
big one.
25.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Whereas for young people, that is just unthinkable.
Right.
Right.
So talk to me about that. So, the price of an average house in Sydney, Melbourne is now like 10 to 15 times your annual salary.
Yeah.
The notion of home ownership feels quite unachievable from, someone in their early 20s.
Yeah.
How does that shape your outlook?
I think it has fundamentally altered the social makeup of Australia, the political makeup, because that whole thing about people get more conservative as they grow older, that's probably because when you buy a house, get a stake in the economy. And you
interesting.
don't want to be reckless with the economy because you don't want stuff to happen to your stake.
Right.
If my generation, most of us don't have that stake in the economy.
Interesting.
And if we don't think we're going to have one for 15 years, then we're probably going to be more receptive to not necessarily the reckless, but the anti-establishment for sure, for the institution trashing. So I think it probably lays the groundwork for a more volatile body politic.
Interesting, because I also read in a recent report that Gen Z's definition of wealthy and their financial aspirations is a lot higher than previous generations.
Yeah.
So I think the report said a Gen Z thinks the definition of financial success is a $600 per year salary versus millennials, which is more like 180, 200, something
And then
like that.
for the oldest generation, it was like 37,000 or something crazy.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe inflation adjusted. But talk to me about that. Why do Gen Z think that, that number for what financial success looks like is so much higher than previous generations?
I think that's probably different. I think the cause is social media, our TV.
Oh, I see.
Luxury is everywhere. All the rappers we follow with chains,
see.
like the Kardashians. We know everyone in LA through TikTok, right? And the newest Tesla they've bought. I think it's more normalized for us. Yes, glamour's always been a Hollywood thing, but because we're on our phones all the time.
Okay, so it's like social media has put mimetic desire on steroids. And instead of comparing yourself to the person next door, you're comparing yourself to this influencer who is putting forward a pretty unrealistic version of their life, or you're, like following the, heiresses who have their Van Cleef and the Prada bags and all of that.
But equally, comparing yourself to the house next door isn't now so much physical, it's you follow your neighbor on Instagram and you see their stylized, edited photos that make the kitchen look great or something like that. So I think that could be a big player here.
So our first is it cringe is Danny, are selfies cringe?
Selfies?
Yeah, taking a selfie.
Thank you. Complicated question, because dare I say the way that with
People
love
like me.
you might take a selfie is completely different. So there's irony to this.
Okay.
Like if a young person is taking a selfie and they're like #selfie or doing a boomerang, and it's like, that's ironic. There are layers to that you only get from being a child of the internet.
I see. Okay.
Whereas if you like want to get a photo with someone and you're like, let's take a selfie, that's kind of cringe.
Okay.
Do you think that's right, Vic?
So
Vic's
if
our 23-year-old producer.
I was like, Danny, let's go take a selfie. And
Yeah, because it's awkward, because there's like that 2-second moment of silence where we're smiling, and I don't know. And then what are you doing with that? Are you posting that? Because,
Okay, so if you saw someone post something like that on, like, let's say Insta, like a selfie, would you be like, oh.
So there is like a threshold of perhaps it is intentionally cringe where it
can
becomes
go full
really
circle.
cool.
It can go, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's contextual.
And I feel like it's so subtle, right? Like
So subtle.
You wouldn't be able to describe in a list of whether it's ironic. You would just be able to kind of sense
If you see it, you know.
Got it.
And maybe if they're like really pouting, they're being like silly.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if it's like meant to be a wholesome selfie, maybe if you're with like your mum, I don't know.
So if I wanted to seem cool in front of Gen Z, but I wanted to commemorate this moment, how would I go about taking a photo?
What you would do is you would take a candid photo.
Okay.
Right? Which for our listeners is really cool in that it looks like
effortless.
Natural,
Got
effortless.
It. Yep.
And it kind of is.
Yeah.
Right? So without telling everyone, you would take the photo, and then like later you'd be like, can I post this? Always make permission.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very demure.
Yeah, because no effort. Effort is cringe for my generation.
Fascinating. We
As
have
a
to have
rule.
a whole
That can be next
other
week's
episode
question.
about
Okay,
that.
cool.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that brings us to the end of the first episode of Gen Z
Woo!
Explained. Hope our listeners learned something about this fascinating mercurial generation. And if you liked the episode, rate and review us.
Leave a comment down below.
I'm not saying this ironically, but we hope to catch you next time. Thanks, Danny.
Woo! Thanks, Jessy.